For 30 million years, the seas were ruled by ediacarans, simple animals that absorbed food through their skin. But meanwhile, another lineage of animals was evolving a very different feeding strategy: a gut. The first guts may have looked like the ones in jellyfish today.
If you look at something like a jellyfish, it doesn't have a mouth and an anus and a tube going from one end to the other. All it has is a sac, so it can take food into the sac, and then it can spit the food back out. That works very well for jellyfish.
But life in the sea was about to become far more complex. The ediacarans disappeared, overtaken by an entirely new array of creatures, born in an evolutionary event known as the Cambrian explosion.
This chapter represents a quantum leap. This is probably the most important evolutionary event in the history of our planet.
With the advent of predators, we basically start off with an arms race. As we start developing organisms that are building sophisticated teeth and means of biting and chewing and eating things, we also start developing organisms that have a means of protecting themselves against that.
This eruption of forms and shapes also brings a radical new digestive design.
These Cambrian creatures were quite different from those of the ediacaran in a number of ways. One of the most important ones is mobility. Mobility allowed organisms to feed differently.
Active hunting required a more efficient gut, a way to take food in one end of the body and expel waste out the other. What evolved was a tube with holes at both ends, the basic blueprint of our own gut. But a tube alone was not enough to digest the well-armored prey of this new food chain. Predators needed extra help. That help came from something so tiny, it's invisible to the naked eye. Today, a striking example of this ancient digestive secret lies a mile below the surface. Deep in the Pacific Ocean, scientists from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, piloting an unmanned submersible, found a whale carcass. More interesting than the bones were the feathery plumes coating them.
When I first found them, I was really intrigued. This was clearly an animal that had never been seen before.
These plumes were actually a bizarre new type of marine worm, an animal with no mouth and no teeth that somehow has evolved to eat whalebone. To make sense of this digestive oddity, specimens were sent to Greg Rouse at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography.
I spent a lot of time dissecting the bones to get the worms out and studied them very carefully to try and understand their anatomy. What was really interesting was that we couldn't find any gut. There was no mouth, there was no digestive system. So we were really intrigued as to how these worms were able to get their nutrition.
Without a digestive system, how could these worms eat solid bone?
When we started to dissect open these roots, to look at them very closely, they were full of bacteria. And this gave us a vital clue.
Rouse discovered that the worms themselves weren't eating the whalebone, but slowly burrowing inside it.
The worms were providing access to the whalebone for the bacteria. They were drilling into the bone and taking the bacteria down in their roots.
Though Rouse is still investigating exactly how they do it, it's clear the bacteria are digesting the proteins and fats in the whalebone.
These bacteria were working with the worms in a symbiotic relationship, breaking down the whalebone, and in turn, the worms were then eating the bacteria. So they didn't need a gut, they were actually deriving all of their nutrition through these bacteria that were devouring the whalebone for them.
Long ago, bacteria, the very first life on Earth, evolved enzymes to break down all manner of organic material. When the first animals emerged, bacteria would find shelter in their guts. In return, bacteria broke down the food that animals could not digest themselves.
So one of the intriguing questions that we have is how this cooperation could have evolved. And it appears to have occurred several times in evolutionary history. It seems to appear when there is a source of nutrition that's difficult for animals to directly exploit.
Over 500 million years later, bacteria are still essential for digestion in nearly all animals. We carry some 10 trillion microbes in our own guts, which help us extract nutrients from our food. Bacteria were essential for digestion in one of the animal kingdom's most successful lineages. Creatures with backbones, our own ancestors, the first fish, evolved into fast-swimming predators. With powerful eyes and other senses for hunting, fish also evolved a more sophisticated gut. No longer a blind pouch or a simple tube, but the first proper stomach.
When the stomach shows up, you get to pass food past different parts of your digestive tract in a certain order so you can be much more efficient about breaking the food down and getting the good stuff out of it.
This powerful digestive engine opened the way to bigger, more complex animals. New kinds of food created new evolutionary opportunities. 375 million years ago, one lineage of fish discovered a whole new world of opportunity. On land, some land vertebrates would evolve guts for eating leaves, while others would eat insects. They, in turn, would be eaten by other animals. Eventually, the biggest guts on dry land would evolve to fuel one of evolution's great triumphs: the dinosaurs.